This is the Build Wealth Canada Show, episode number 74.
Welcome to the Build Wealth Canada podcast, where it's all about becoming debt-free, accelerating your wealth, and taking control of your money. Now, here's your host, Cornell Schreiber.
Hello and welcome to the Build Wealth Canada Show. One of my favorite things to do on the show is to interview other early retirees, especially those in Canada, to learn how they did it and really dissect their journey to financial independence and or early retirement. Now, no matter where you are on your financial independence journey, I truly believe that we can all learn from others that have done it. And so I like to view what they did as a case study where we can break down their journey into actionable parts that we can apply to our own lives. There are, after all, many paths to financial independence, and so it's valuable to know what those paths are so that you can pick and choose the components that are the best fit for you and that are the most aligned with your own goals. And so our guest today is Rajan Van. Rajan worked in the insurance industry for 8 years before retiring at 29 and becoming a full-time parent. Rajan and his wife Danielle, along with their 3 young children, live in Northern Ontario, and they write regularly on topics related to parenting, health, mindfulness, and money. And you can follow them over at mindfulfamily.ca. Now, Rajan recently published 5 Years to Freedom, a Canadian Guide to Early Retirement, which documents his journey to financial independence. In this interview, he's going to take us through his early retirement story and how he got there, the lessons that he's learned along the way, which you can then apply in your own life to help you retire earlier, and how he was able to cut $53,000 in spending annually by retiring early. Very, very interesting piece. And also how he and his wife were able to retire so early despite having 3 young kids, which is often perceived as very difficult due to how expensive many believe kids are. So we're going to cover all that and much more in the interview. Now, before we get into that, I have some really exciting news in that my favorite bank and the bank that I personally use is now letting us have RRSPs and TFSAs with them. Now, why am I actually excited about this? Well, it's because they are currently offering 2.3% interest on money that you have in those accounts, which is way more than what I'm seeing from other banks in Canada by far. Plus, there's no fees, no minimum balances, and it's secured by the government through CDIC insurance. Now, you may be wondering, Cornell, why would you recommend this? Don't you do passive index investing by buying ETFs in your RRSPs and your TFSA, where you can get an even higher rate of return? And the answer is yes, definitely. That is what I do and what I suggest you do when it comes to ramping up your retirement savings for sure. But it's important to remember that not everyone is ready to have most of their savings in the markets, because while the expected return in the markets is higher than these RRSP and TFSA savings accounts, you also get a lot more volatility by investing in the markets. And depending on your situation, you may not want that volatility yet and would rather have that safer, more secure, and less volatile investment. During COVID, for example, it was pretty common to see a 30% decline in the stock portion of your portfolio. The markets have recovered since then, but obviously not everyone is comfortable with that level of volatility. So these safer investments where you're guaranteed to not lose money can help smooth out such major market declines. Now, just to give you some context, the rate that EQ has on their RRSP and TFSA is 2.3% at the time of this recording, which, like I said, is much, much higher than what I'm seeing being offered by other banks. And their high interest savings account is also at 1.5%, which, like I said in the past, is up to 30 times higher than what many other banks are offering in Canada. So definitely worth considering, and all that money is guaranteed and safe as it's covered by the government's CDIC insurance. So if you do choose to sign up to EQ savings account, their RRSP, or their TFSA, or all 3, then all I ask is that you use my link to sign up, which is buildwealthcanada.ca/EQ, as that would help really support the show. And as a thank you for doing that, I'll also send you my guide on all the investments that I personally buy and own, with explanations on why I chose them, which I think will help you a lot in optimizing your own investments, your own portfolio, and becoming aware of some of the top ETFs in Canada with the lowest fees, while also seeing really a well-optimized model portfolio that you can use yourself if you want. So to get that, just sign up for a free high-interest savings account over at buildwealthcanada.ca/EQ. That's buildwealthcanada.ca/the letter E, the letter Q. And once you have that account, you can open up a free TFSA and or RRSP account, and just send me any confirmation that you get from EQ to bonus at buildwealthcanada.ca, and I'll email you the guide for free. All right. So thank you in advance for supporting the show in that way. Enjoy the guide. And now let's get into the interview. And remember, the RSP season ends at the end of February. So basically the clock is ticking if you do want to put money into your RSP and have that lower your income proportionally from the prior year. So definitely something to have on your radar as February is almost over. All right. Now let's get to the interview. All right, Rajan, welcome to the show.
Hey, Cornell. Thanks for having me on the show. Really looking forward to this interview, and happy to be on a show that I actually follow and listen to regularly. So it's kind of a little bit of nervousness and a little bit of excitement to be on it feels semi-famous to be on a show that I actually follow.
Awesome. Well, I'm super excited to have you on. I'm always on the prowl for early retirees, specifically in Canada, because, we hear a lot about different retirees in the US, and that's awesome. And there's a lot to learn from them, and, I'm happy to have them on too. But when we hear about a Canadian that's pulled off an early retirement, I just really want to talk to them, right? Because we obviously have a different tax code. We've, our sort of different investment options than the US, different fees and all that. And so it's really great to get a Canadian perspective. And I know just from the feedback I've received, a lot of Canadian listeners appreciate that this is very much a Canadian specific show. And so it's a lot more practical, and they can actually apply what they learn on it because they know it's actually relevant to them because it's all in Canada. So yeah, so super, I'm very, very excited as well. Maybe for anybody that hasn't heard of you, can you take us through your early retirement story and how you got there?
Sure. So my wife and I, we took a pretty quick path to early retirement. We were always pretty good with our money and financially and somewhat frugal, but we were living a pretty, I'd say, higher expense lifestyle in Ottawa, Ontario. And we sort of stumbled across the FIRE movement or financial independence in 2015. And we sort of, a light went off in our head on, getting to early retirement, and we really accelerated our plans, and we retired in 2018. So just 3 years after we actually discovered early retirement. So we were like I said, we were already on a pretty good financial trajectory, but we had just purchased a big house in the city in Ottawa. We had a pretty expensive mortgage. We had car payments. We had daycare payments, and we had careers, and we were pretty ambitious career-wise. And for us, I think what prompted us to early retirement is that when we started having children, we really reflected on our lives, and we realized that we didn't really want to keep working forever. And around that time, we discovered Mr. Money Mustache. I was just one day stumbled across one of his newspaper article that was written about him in the Globe and Mail, and got really intrigued by the idea of extremely early retirement. I had originally thought early retirement was like, oh, maybe we can pull this off, in our 40s. Maybe we don't have to work till we're 60, and maybe, we can travel the world in our 40s. That was my idea of early retirement. And then when I heard of Mr. Money Mustache's story of retiring when he was 30, it really prompted us to reflect on that idea and to see if it was too good to be true or if it was actually a feasible idea. So my wife and I started following Mr. Money Mustache and essentially went on to read every single article he wrote up to that point, which I think was about 250 articles. And we learned how to pull it off, and then started devising our own plan. And we came to realize that we really only needed $30,000 a year to live comfortably in retirement. This would be done essentially just by cutting out daycare costs, cutting out most of our transportation costs, which were related to car payments. And the big one would be getting rid of our mortgage. Getting rid of our mortgage was accomplished by essentially just using the equity built up in, a house in a big city like Ottawa, and using it to buy a smaller house in a smaller town, which had much lower cost of living. And for us, that was accomplished pretty smoothly. We just moved to Northern Ontario. We made about $150,000 by selling our house. And with that money, we were able to buy a property mortgage free. And we've been living mortgage free ever since. And we've been able to continue living here on $30,000 a year and living happily retired now for almost 3 years. And yeah, that's how we got to where we are today. And then in the last 6 months or so, I've been documenting what we did to get to this point, and which led to me writing the book that I recently published called 5 Years to Freedom, which documented our our story and sort of try to inspire people to try to also aim for early retirement as young as we did, and showing how it's actually possible and quite easy, and especially in Canada, because we do have a lot of advantages being in this country.
Awesome. And yeah, the audio cut out a little bit there as you were talking, but the book is called 5 Years to Freedom, in case somebody missed it. And is the best place to check it out, would it be just to Google it on Amazon, or what's your preference?
Yeah, the best bet is you just go on Amazon, you search 5 Years to Freedom. It's a Canadian guide to early retirement, and or you could just go on our website. Our website's mindfulfamily.ca, and there's a link on there to get a copy on Amazon as well. That's it's being sold right now exclusively through Amazon, so that's the best place to get it.
That's great. Yeah, it was a really enjoyable book. I read the whole thing. I want to make sure I read it before the interview, and I got pretty hooked on it. Once I started, I was really in, because like I said, it's pretty rare to see someone retire that early, specifically in Canada. And then the other big thing, which I know we'll get to later in the interview, is that you also have 3 children. And so, I mean, that's very unique. And the other, which, people will argue, well, that makes it so much tougher, right? So we'll definitely dive into that as well. But I mean, you kind of give, I think, hope for a lot of people where, okay, wait, you can stay in Canada, you can have children, and you can still retire early. That's a very encouraging thing. So I think that's definitely great. And also, it's not like you sold your house and then you moved your entire family with 3 kids to some inexpensive country in Asia, right? Which is totally fine if that's what someone wants to do. But I'm sure for a lot of Canadians listening, that may not be on your radar. Like I know for us, we've got family here, we've got our parents here in Canada. We don't want to move across the world. We want to see them more often, that kind of a thing. And so it's nice to hear that, both for myself and also in your case. Yeah, we did the early retirement thing, and you are actually able to stay in Canada. You don't have to uproot your entire family. So that's really great. And now, as someone that's been retired for 3 years yourself, you're now in your early 30s. What are some of the lessons you learned that could help aspiring early retirees or those that are new to retirement?
For me, I'd say, reflecting back now in the last 3 years, the biggest lesson I got out of being retired early is that I probably worried too much. I always thought, like, maybe I'm not worrying enough. Maybe I'm not, at the beginning, and when I was putting together the plan to retire early, I was thinking, am I missing something? Is this too good to be true? Am I going to, have to go ask for my job back 6 months down the road? So there's a lot of worries about, are we doing the right thing? Like overall, I was very confident about our situation, but there was still part of me that was always very risk adverse. And it was always thinking, like, is this too good to be true? So at the beginning of of being retired, I still closely monitored our expenses. I would get sometimes worried if, an issue came up with some of our investments, particularly with our rental property investments. I kept thinking of worst case scenarios. What if our income streams dry out, or what if our spending's way higher than we anticipated? But year after year, and month after month, we keep beating our expectations. Like even though we've done a lot of traveling, we've bought a lot of things that were important to us and that we liked, and we still haven't surpassed spending $30,000 in any given year. And we keep surpassing our expectations from an income standpoint. We run into issues, we run into obstacles with our rental properties and with our investments, but in the long term, we always keep, surpassing what our expectations are from an income standpoint. And so, yeah, that's the thing. My number one lesson I find from being retired is, don't worry too much. I'm always thinking of the Mr. Money Mustache article that he wrote a while ago called "First Retire, Then Get Rich," and it was kind of like, yeah, it's kind of, once you're retired, you get a lot more freedom. You do, a lot of people do end up getting richer after they retire. So, and I think that's the case with us.
For sure. And I've talked to definitely my share of early retirees, and I find that's a very common thing, is to get scared and a bit nervous in the very beginning because you're new to it. And I even read some stats somewhere how one of the most stressful things in someone's life is actually when they retire, not necessarily just early retiree. I imagine it's even more so when you're an early retiree because you've got a lot more years you need to cover with your investment income. But I mean, definitely it's a stressful thing. I've definitely gone through it. And I mentioned on the show before with Bryce and Christy, they were on Canada's other really early retirees. I remember, I would say Christy's like almost like my shrink, I'll get all nervous and everything, before handing in the resignation, and she would kind of, talk me through it, like just to calm me down. Right. So I was the same way, very, very worried. And I'm still not 100% as relaxed as I think Mr. Money Mustache is, but I've noticed definitely kind of like you, I think that as the years go on, you start kind of, hey, this actually isn't as difficult and isn't as crazy as maybe I initially thought. And you actually do have a lot of options when you do have all that time freed up as well. So I definitely hear you. And it seems like both of us had a very similar experience in that regard. So I'm glad you shared that. Is there anything that surprised you after you became an early retiree? For example, were there any preconceived notions or assumptions of what you thought early retirement would be like, and then it ended up being something totally different? You mentioned how it isn't as sort of stressful anymore, but is there anything else like that?
Well, one big thing that when I wrote the book is that the idea of a financial crisis, and there's an entire chapter dedicated to financial crises in the book. Leading up to early retirement, a lot of people talk about the 4% rule, or you need to, have a certain amount of investments, but you need to be on the lookout that there could be, a market crash or financial crisis, and that could really screw up your plans. If you retire with a net worth of say $1 million, and then your first year retired, you get you suffer through a market crash like the 2008 recession, and all of a sudden your net worth is $500,000. Well, I'm sure that could lead to a lot of fears for a lot of people and a lot of anxiety. So we were always on the lookout for that. When we retired, we said, if there's a financial crisis, we need to be ready for it. We need to be willing to be flexible. If there's a financial crisis and we lose half our net worth, maybe we'd have to go back to work for a little bit. A lot of things can happen, especially if you have a financial crisis very early on in your retirement. So for us, sure enough, we were less than 2 years into our financial independence journey or retirement, and the financial crisis of 2020 happened, and with the COVID pandemic and the world being shut down, and the markets crashed and went down, I think, nearly 40%. And we saw a big drop in our net worth right away. Even our, real estate holdings, we saw, wow, the market's going to suffer here as well. So we were ready for it. We were thinking, we'll cut down. If we have to go back to work, we will, but the big thing that surprised me was that, surviving a financial crisis really wasn't that hard. And I mean, this may be a very unique situation, but as we saw 2020 unroll, real estate prices shot up, stock market rebounded drastically, which led to us having pretty much our best financial year ever was 2020, which is, the biggest surprise that I've seen in our early retirement journey so far. Just how, our first financial crisis was essentially, a cakewalk. But I don't expect that, the next one will be this easy. But it's just one thing that really surprised me from jumping into, early retirement.
Gotcha. And yeah, I find too that you and I are pretty unique in the early retirement space in Canada, because we both got to early retirement utilizing passive investments like investing in index funds, but we also used rental properties to get us there. And now for me, passive index investing was a better fit. So that's all that I do now. I don't have any more rentals. But for anybody that is debating using one of them or both of them, what's been your experience in using these different vehicles?
That's a great question, because for us, we needed rental properties to be part of our investment strategy, because we weren't planning to retire with a $1 million net worth that we can just live on 4% for the rest of our lives. Because we didn't think we'd be at $1 million net worth by the time we retired. We wanted to retire in under 5 years, and we weren't close enough to, let's say, $1 million in invested assets. So we saw real estate as being something that can, propel us to early retirement quicker, because the thing with real estate is you can achieve much higher return on investments with real estate. The downside with real estate is that, it is less passive than purely investing in index funds. With real estate though, you can really dictate how high or how low you want your ROI to be, sorry. And so for us, like at the beginning of our journey, we bought 2 rental properties when leading up to our early retirement, because we wanted to generate all of our income required in retirement just through real estate. And we wanted our index investments just to be our sort of what if money, our safety net. So we invested in 2 rental properties, and we were able to achieve a very high return on investment on them because we did essentially everything ourselves. We managed everything we could. We did as much of the renovations to these properties, as much of the maintenance as we could. We traveled a lot because these rental properties were in a different town than where we were living at the time. And in the process, we were able to increase rents. We were able to make the buildings more efficient, and we achieved very high return on investments, being able to get to over $30,000 in passive income just on 2 rental properties. Since then, since being retired, we've been able to sort of step back and sub out a lot more things related to our rental properties, because we've been able to see that, maybe we don't need such a high return on investment. So we can take a bit of a step back and not have to sort of do everything on the properties. Just in the past year, we had to redo some shingles on the property. And this is something, I could have taken on myself, but I got a contractor to do it. And same thing with some snow removal. We used to do almost all the snow removal on our properties in the wintertime. And now we're leaning more towards using some third-party services for that. So that's what I like about the real estate side of investment. You can sort of control how passive it is, or decide how passive you want it. You could be 100% passive, or you could be totally hands-on. And then the other part of investing in real estate that I like is that it diversifies your assets as well. So, if there's a market crash, strictly affecting, the stock market, but the real estate market, doesn't suffer a crash, well, then you're sort of protected because half your assets are, in real estate. Conversely, if there's a real estate crash, but the stock market is still doing okay, then, I kind of like the diversification from that standpoint. But that being said, I do see ourselves moving more and more towards the 100% passive index fund route, such as what you did, what you're doing now, in the future, because at some point we're going to want to be completely detached from from maintenance and from being a property manager. And I like the idea of being 100% in index funds, and I think one day we may be shifting more and more of our assets towards index funds, and just to become 100% passive as we get older and we want to be, purely, retired in the traditional sense.
That's great. Yeah, I definitely, one of the reasons I got so excited about having you on was that you took a different path. And so it really is nice to see, or to at least show in real life, that there isn't just one path to early retirement, one path to financial independence. There's actually different ones you can take. So, I look at, for like in our case, it was, we did the real estate thing, but then I decided, okay, let's just go all passive. And so I kind of did a combination of the two. But then when we actually retired, it was all through passive index funds. And then you look at someone like Bryce and Christy, who've been on the show here before and at the summit several times. They almost did kind of like the opposite of what you did, where they didn't own any real estate at all. They basically rented, and so they were able to pay less that way. And then they basically just took all that money and they invested it, right, instead of just spending it on frivolous things or whatever. So they kind of did the no home ownership, no rental property, just all index funds are right from the get-go. Whereas mine was a bit of a hybrid, and then yours is an even different one, where it's okay, we actually are going to primarily live off of our real estate, and we're going to use that as sort of like a shortcut to get to FI faster because there are more things within your control. And there was obviously no free lunch. And I remember reading in your book, some of the horror stories you had with the tenants and the properties and all that kind of thing. So definitely it wasn't easy money. I think you would probably agree, because reading what I read in your book,
sure.
it's, so it's like, yeah, you were able to get there quicker through it, but you were definitely, you even just said you put in a lot of work into it with you and your wife to be able to get there. And now you're living off the real estate. And from your book, you mentioned that you're going to use your investment portfolio maybe a bit later, or you start transitioning to more passive as well. So yeah, very, very, I think big takeaway here is that there are different ways to get to that early retirement. You could go real estate with just your house. You could go real estate with rentals. You could do just passive index investing, or you could do a hybrid approach. There isn't sort of one solution, and only that one solution works, and that's it. So I think that's very encouraging for a lot of people, for sure. So thank you for sharing that. And now a quick break to tell you about some of the resources you may find helpful on our Build Wealth Canada site. With the amount of questions I get from the show, it's impossible to reply to everyone. So what I've done is brought in 2 resident experts that you can speak to for free to get some of your questions answered. So for financial planning related questions, we have John Callos. He's been one of the show's most popular guests. He's a certified financial planner and is who I use to crunch all our numbers before we retired to make sure that we have enough to do an early retirement and won't run out of money and have to go back to work. So maybe you're saving for retirement and want to know if you're on the right track and are saving enough to retire early, or maybe you just have some questions and want to make sure you have your finances in order. So John's able to help you with those kinds of questions, and he's agreed to give Build Wealth Canada listeners a free 30-minute consultation so you can at least get some of your questions answered. I created a page where you can sign up to get a free 30-minute consultation, and when you sign up, you'll also be emailed a guide on the top questions to ask when looking for a financial planner or advisor. So that's over at buildwealthcanada.ca/John. That's buildwealthcanada.ca/John. And if you have any investing related questions, that's the area that I'll be tackling. I answer all questions from students of the investing course, where you learn everything you need to know to be a do-it-yourself passive investor and pay the absolute lowest fees on your investments. And it actually shows you how to completely bypass the fees that robo-advisors charge, which can easily cost you tens of thousands of dollars over your investment lifetime. And in the course, you see videos of me actually investing my own money so you can see how to do everything step by step. And I'm just an email away if you have any questions. So these lessons helped us retire in early 30s, and we still use them to this day. You can learn more about the course and try it risk-free over at buildwealthcanada.ca/invest. That's buildwealthcanada.ca/invest. And last but not least, the other resident expert that I brought on is there to answer your mortgage related questions. So Sean is the best-selling author of the book Burn Your Mortgage. He's been on CTV, Global News, CBC, The Globe and Mail, and many others. He's a licensed mortgage broker too, so I definitely also encourage you to reach out to him if you're looking to get a new mortgage, or if your mortgage is coming up for renewal, as at the very least, he'll be able to provide you with a short list of the best mortgages that he's been able to find across all of Canada with the latest rates. None of this costs you anything, and there's no obligation to get your mortgage through him or use any of those suggested mortgages. So I made a special page for Build Wealth Canada listeners too, where you can sign up to chat with him for free. And to help you further when you do that, I'll also email you the mortgage checklist, which is a guide on the top things to look for and consider when choosing a mortgage. So the page to speak with Sean and get your mortgage questions answered for free is buildwealthcanada.ca/Sean. That's buildwealthcanada.ca/Sean, SEAN. All right. I hope you find that helpful. And now back to the show. Now, knowing what you know now, if you had to start over to work your way towards financial independence, is there anything that you would do differently?
No mistakes, like from just other than, like I said earlier, worrying less. I think I maybe worrying caused unnecessary stress and, overall, but that affects many aspects of my life. Just worrying less is probably a good, a key life lesson. But other than that, from being retired, one of the things that I've learned is that routines are really important when you become retired, especially retired early, and especially so when you retire with children. So like you said earlier, we have 3 children. So for us, routines is really important because although we retired to become full-time parents, and our number one priority in our lives is our kids, and we spend as much time as we can with our kids, but we do realize that we do need some personal time, like adults, the adults in the family, my wife and I, we need some time to work on our hobbies and our personal projects. And, for me, for the last year, it's been, writing this book and taking some time away to go in a quiet room and write and blog, and sometimes just go in a quiet room and read. So for us, we stick to routines. We have a weekly routine where, day one, it's, family time. And then in the afternoon, one adult gets a certain amount of time on their own. And then day two, same thing. And then we take turns. And then in there, we carve out the time that's needed to go, run the errands, go do the groceries. So we're very specific in our weekly routines and in our schedules. And I find that works really well. It really lets us see what our week's going to be like, and really helps us, or forces us to take the time to work on our personal projects, but it also allows us to really be present when it's the family time or the time that we spend with the kids, because we know we're going to have some time later to work on our, the things we want to work. So it prevents us from being sort of like half around, or half family time, half working. If we stick to our routine, then we find we get a lot more done, and we have a lot more a lot better week that way.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and maybe even a bit counterintuitive, because I remember when we were still working our way towards financial independence, and I think for a lot of people, we think, okay, you're retired now, so why set a routine? Why impose structure on yourself? You had to deal with structure your whole life almost, right? Where you had to go to work, you had to be at work at a certain time or around a certain time. So when you're retired, you don't have to deal with that anymore. So it's this like big sense of freedom. But I hear you, and maybe this is because of the kids, and we have children too, is that by having an actual routine, you're able to be fully, if you're doing your own thing, you're fully present on that. And when you're with your kids, you can be fully present on that, as opposed to splitting your attention 50-50 because you never got to do that one thing you wanted to do. And so you're half thinking about that, half thinking about the kids. And then so you're not really doing either well, essentially. So It was really interesting to hear you say that, because we've had the same experience where I thought it was going to be this totally unstructured thing. And then it turns out structure actually works really, really well, because you get to prioritize things the way you want, as opposed to just kind of letting the day flow however it may. And then, you may not actually focus on where you want to focus. So thank you for sharing that. You mentioned in your book that you don't really budget in the traditional sense. Can you take us through how you managed your cash flows with your wife during the accumulation phase, so as you're working your way towards early retirement, and how do you do it now in early retirement, if it's any different?
For us in the accumulation stage, it was mostly just analyzing our expenses. In the book, one of my chapters is called "Don't Budget, Just Analyze." I've never liked the idea of creating a budget, because I find creating a budget is I'm going to spend this much on entertainment, $300 a month on entertainment, $400 on groceries, and then you try to live within those parameters. But then it's sometimes a lot of times you're going to surpass those numbers, and then you're just going to either feel guilty or you're going to avoid doing those things, and then it doesn't leave you with a great feeling, and it doesn't motivate you to keep on track of your budget. A lot of times people do a budget like that, and then a couple months down the road, after seeing that they surpassed a lot of categories or blown their budget, they give up on their budget, and that's never a good idea, because some sort of financial analyzing or budgeting is better than nothing. So what we've always done is just we analyze our expenses. So we after a month is done or a couple months are done, we look back on the previous month, all of our expenses down to the last dollar, even cash spending, and we see where all our money went, and then it allows us to reflect on where our money's going, and if it is where we want it to be. If we see month after month that there's a certain category of our spending that's way higher than we think it should be, well, naturally we're going to sort of change our behavior or change our lifestyle around that. And doing this from the beginning in our accumulation stage, it really allowed us to see what our spending looked like from a sort of working standpoint, and how much of our expenses was related to actually living in our house with what our mortgage payment represented as a percentage of our total spending, and how much car payments represented as a total spending. And so the big difference between when we were building up for retirement and now, I would say, is previously we would sort of do it on a monthly basis. Now we more look at our expenses from an annual perspective. We look back on 2020 and see we spent $29,500, and where did that money go? And then we can compare that to 2019, and then we compare that to 2018, and we could see if our spending's going up, if one of these years we spend $40,000 instead of $30,000, well, then we can see where did we spend extra, and was that what we expected? If it's not what we expected, then we need to discuss did we do anything wrong? If it is exactly how we saw it, and this is how we expect going forward to spend this higher amount than we did before, well, we just need to plan around that. We just need to make sure that the cash flows or the income is going to reflect the expenses long term. So yeah, that's how that's how we've been proceeding from our analyzing instead of budgeting for our expenses.
So it sounds like you would add up all the different components, and so you would have different line items like car, groceries, or just regular sort of living expenses. And then do you actually have a certain target where, okay, we think our groceries should be around X amount, and then that way you kind of have a flag go off where, okay, if it's like 20% more than that, then okay, we need to sort of reevaluate this. Is that how you do it, or do you not even set any sort of target or range?
I don't set a target. We just look at based on historical. So if we've traditionally spent on average $500 a month on groceries, and then we did our analyzing for 2020, and all of a sudden our grocery expenses were $700 per month on average, then I would just wonder what happened this year that we spent $200 more per month. And maybe it's justified, maybe it's we just decided to eat a lot healthier this year and it costs a lot more money, or maybe our third child started eating more, and we so it's just finding explanation. Or it could be that maybe this year we didn't optimize our grocery spending as much, and we didn't really watch out where we were spending our money, going to the lower cost grocery store rather than the higher end one in town. And then maybe we're like, okay, well, let's make a focus going forward to optimize our grocery spending. Or it could be something entirely different. It could be on the internet, cell phone category of our spending. If we saw, in one year we spent $300, and then the next year we spent $500, and then we're like, oh, maybe it's time to reevaluate our cell phone plan and our internet plan. Maybe those expenses have creeped up. Maybe it's time to just look at them, and then we do a bit of shopping, spend an afternoon analyzing the market, and we find a new service provider, and we bring those expenses back down to the number it was historically. It allows us to see where the increases are.
That makes sense. Yeah. And then you do that, you said, on kind of an annual basis now that you're retired, whereas when you're working up to that, you wanted to micromanage that a little bit more, it sounds like, because you do have this savings target that you're really trying to hit. Whereas it sounds like now that you're retired, you already hit that goal. So it's more, you want to make sure that your spending doesn't get out of proportion, unknowingly. And then all of a sudden, things aren't really, like, your investments are having trouble keeping up with your increase in expenses. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, exactly. And,
okay.
And especially like in retirement, it's not a big deal if 1 month we spend $1,000 more than we normally would, because month to month it's the $1,000 could be we decided to buy a playground for the backyard or something like that. But on an annual basis, that's where we see the correlation or the trajectory. If on a year-to-year basis we're seeing like a constant increase, then it doesn't necessarily mean we need to reduce our spending. It just means that maybe we need to look at to make sure that our investments are keeping up with our spending. So it's just from that standpoint, now that we're retired, it's just to make sure that both categories are still lining up long term for us, especially because we do have a long trajectory. We do plan to be retired for the next 60 years, so we have to make sure that we're keeping those numbers in line, I guess, long term.
Is there a software that you like to use to track that, or just use a spreadsheet?
Just spreadsheet. We do everything on on Google Sheets online, so we have access to it on all our devices, and my wife and I can each go on there and make changes or add expenses and stuff, or add comments if we have to.
Okay, so you'll look through like a credit card statement and you'll see all the grocery items, and then you just put that total in a spreadsheet, and then that's pretty much it. Is that how you do it?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, and then bills and stuff like utility bills, all those things as I pay them, I put them directly into a spreadsheet. So, and then after that, it's just going through the credit card statement. So.
Gotcha. So this way, so it sounds like a monthly thing, just so that you remember, or it's an ongoing thing if it's a bill you pay. But for something like groceries, I guess, is it a monthly thing at that point, just so that you remember what the different spending things are?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If I wait too long, then I'll forget what the actual spending was. So yeah, on a monthly basis, I'll put everything into a spreadsheet, but then I don't look at it till year end. But yeah, everything goes into the spreadsheet on a month to month basis, and the utility expenses or bills, those get put in as we make them, and then we reflect on it at the end of the year.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, I find if I wait too long, then I'll ask my wife, like, "Hey, what was this thing you bought?" And then she can't remember because like if I ask her something 3 months ago, right? So it's trying to find that sweet spot where you're not spending too much time micromanaging that stuff, but at the same time, you don't want to leave too much of a space where they don't remember, right? And then so it's trying to kind of find that. So you said a month works well for you guys. Okay, interesting. Yeah, great. Now, how do you guys structure the withdrawals from your investment portfolio, including real estate, so that they are tax efficient?
So for us, like I find the sweet spot is like 30,000, total income. So we try to keep our reported income around 30,000 because then we get to maximize, CCB, the Canada Child Benefits, and we pay very little taxes at that threshold as well. So, and we'll talk about CCB a little later. So we, and so far in retirement, we've been able to achieve that 30,000 income just based on our rental property incomes. But so we haven't really had to, withdraw money from our investments since we retired. But one of these years, we may look at, if we're able to, one of these years our reported income goes even lower, and we can take out some money and really not like we can look at the tax advantages of potentially taking out our RSPs in the next few years, so that we pay little taxes on it while we take them out, and on years where we have very low income. So we probably plan it around that based on which years and what our reported incomes are. We also have a lot of money right now that is outside of our registered account, so that we have an EQ bank account, kind of like and we keep all of our money there. That's sort of outside of our registered accounts and sort of low risk. That's sort of our money that we use on a day-to-day basis. But that money in the last few years has grown pretty high. So that's sort of our first shot, our first place to go to if we need money in retirement for withdrawals. And then after that, we look at our registered accounts and based on what would make the most sense from a tax standpoint year to year.
Do you hold any investments in your taxable accounts, like dividend paying, ETFs, anything like that?
No, no, not at this point. At this point, in our non-registered accounts, it's just high interest savings. So the way I see it is that the money in a non-registered account is, with EQ Bank, earning 1.5% interest. I see that as kind of like a bond. So, at one point we had almost $100,000 in those accounts. That would, when I do my analysis of our, assets or index funds, I put that as like bonds because it's generating, almost on the same level as what a bond would generate. And then based on that, the rest of our registered accounts, our RSPs and our TFSAs are invested in index ETFs, but in a pretty aggressive growth ETF. So let's say it's 80% stocks and 20% bonds. Well, now, if we add in our registered accounts, or non-registered accounts, which are in high interest savings accounts, which I treat like a bond, then, maybe instead of being 80-20, we're really at like a 60-40. So it sort of reduces our risk level a bit. So, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I remember reading in your book, you mentioned that you're a big fan of Vigro as the one that you hold in your.
Yeah.
So when someone's, just for anybody maybe new to this, when he's saying aggressive, he's not talking about some speculative, mining company up north or Bitcoin, or he's not talking about that. He's talking in a sense of basically your equity to bond split. So with Vigro, correct me if I'm wrong, I think is it 80-20? If I remember correctly?
Yeah, that one's an 80-20. So.
Yeah. So 80 equity, 20% bond, which if you talk to advisors or people in the field, they'll say that's on the aggressive side, referring to the volatility you can endure or that you are likely to experience in that. So it's kind of higher potential growth, but also higher potential volatility is what we're talking about. So yeah, I just want to clear that up in case someone's like, oh, aggressive. So he's investing in some like doing some angel investing or something like that.
I haven't succumbed to buying some GameStop stock yet. So sticking to the ETF investing, and I find that's the best route, and it's you do go down, but everything seems to come back up. And one thing that like I say, I like having a certain amount of money in like a high interest savings account because it helps diversify a little bit. It's a lot lower risk, because it's a guaranteed 1.5%. And just in the fall, we had recently sold a real estate holding that we had. We reevaluated our finances last year, and we decided that we can go down to one rental property, and it would generate enough cash flow for us, along with our net worth being almost entirely into index ETFs with still a real estate property. And at the time when we did that, we had a big windfall cash wise when we sold our real estate holdings, and that's when we opened our first non-registered account. And at the time I was thinking, well, it's good that we have a sizable amount in a high interest savings account, because there's a lot of volatility coming up in the market, with the US elections and stuff. So maybe it's better that we're diversified a little bit more. And then lo and behold, actually the stock markets kept going up another 10% in the later part of the year. So it would have probably been better off just investing it all in ETFs at all the times. But I still like the comfort level of having a certain amount in a high interest savings account, which, it gives us, that's the money we're going to go to first if we need it. And even if there's a market crash tomorrow, we still have this money that we can go to that's not going to be affected by a market crash.
Mm-hmm. I hear you. I do things the same way. Definitely try to keep as much in equities as possible, but definitely also nice to have a bit in a high interest savings account. Like I said, I use EQ as well, just so that, those credit card payments, property tax, things like that, you've got some money sitting there ready to go. You don't have to sell every time that you have a big expense to pay. You don't have to sell equities all the time or eagerly waiting for those dividends to show up once a quarter, right? So that you have it. This way you've got a bit of a buffer as well. So I hear you. I find that's a pretty big, I found that to be very helpful, and especially from a stress relief perspective as well, right? Just to know that, okay, I've got some money sitting there that's going to cover X amount of credit card payments for the next, whatever length you feel comfortable with, right? There's definitely some benefit to that, 100%. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So early retirement seems like an unattainable dream to many people, yet it's surprising how attainable it can actually be when you crunch the numbers. And one of my favorite parts of your book was how you were able to cut $53,000 in spending annually by retiring early. Can you tell us a bit about how early retirement allows you to make such drastic cuts, and consequently how a lot of Canadians may actually be much closer to an early retirement than first meets the eye?
Yeah. To me, that was a big shocker as well. When we first crunched the numbers, we had when we first set out on the path to we want to retire early. We analyzed our entire spending for the last full year, and we had spent $83,000. And then we just looked at what are our expenses? What are our top 5 expenses? And then right away we saw our number one expense was our mortgage, which eventually we would get rid of. The second expense was our daycare, which, because we had two kids in daycare, costing us $24,000 a year in a bigger city like Ottawa. That was our second expense. And then our fourth expense was our car payment, which was also something we could realistically get rid of down the road. So just by handling these 3 expenses, and then also assuming we can get to a lower cost of living area which we eventually did, our property taxes went down. So yeah, we essentially, just by taking care of, something as simple as, eliminating our mortgage, eliminating car payments, eliminating daycare, and then finding somewhere that has lower property taxes, we were able to cut $53,000 from our total expenses, and we were already down to $30,000 annual spending. I say that, something as simple as a mortgage payment. It's not that simple from a high level perspective, but if you are willing to relocate like we did, or even just downsize, you could, a lot of Canadians could be mortgage free. And I discussed this in the book, that, a lot of people may already be sitting on $100,000 or $200,000 in equity in their homes, especially with the big real estate boom of 2020 that we saw, with many houses, in certain areas of the country going up in prices. And, if you sold a house and you come out of a real estate transaction with $150,000 or $200,000, you could find some cities in Canada where you could buy a property for that price and, be mortgage free and pay much lower taxes. In the chapter in my book about, low cost of living, I even talk about, a friend of ours in Ottawa who even, just decided to move to, Gatineau, which is, just 20 minutes, from downtown Ottawa. And he was able to find a property for, half the price of what you would find in Ottawa. So it's not necessarily, you don't have to do like us and move to Northern Ontario. For us, Northern Ontario was a good fit because my wife and I are both from Northern Ontario, and we have a lot of roots here, a lot of family. So we were able to find a property and live mortgage free here. But there's plenty of options, even in, where you in Southern Ontario, you can, go a little bit further west to Windsor or to other areas where you can find, lower cost of living areas. But yeah, just by eliminating daycare, mortgage, car payments, and reducing our property taxes, we were already under $30,000 in annual expenses, which was a big shock to us. That was sort of the key moment where we said, well, yeah, actually early retirement is doable.
Yeah, I really love that part in your book, how you actually broke it all down and where that 53,000 came from. And because I really think that, or my hypothesis is that there are many Canadians where, they'll hear a number like 30,000 or 40,000 spending a year. And I've gotten comments like this before, like, that's ridiculous. Like, what did you do? Live under a bridge? Or, I've gotten weird, emails like that. And it's like, well, no, because you can't just say, well, I'm spending, like what you said, I think you said 83,000 a year, right? You can't just be like, oh, I'm spending 83,000 a year now, and therefore, if I was to retire, I need 83,000 in retirement. That's just not true, because so many things that you're currently spending money on, you actually don't need to spend. Like, do you really need 2 cars if both of you don't work anymore, right? Well, you probably are okay with getting away with just one, and that's something we did, and I know you guys did that too. And then, the housing thing as well, right? Is, well, how could I possibly live on this little money? Look how much I spend on my mortgage every month. And it's like, well, okay, but if you've got equity in your house, especially recently, right, because of how much the prices have been going up, what if you sold that and moved somewhere else, and now your mortgage is either nothing or very, very little, right? And again, you don't have to commute to work anymore because you're retired, so you don't need to pay that premium to live in Toronto to be closer to your work because you're not working anymore. And so I think that's a really big paradigm shift, I would call it, that people have to sort of get through, where just because you're spending this much now and 30 or 40,000 sounds like a ridiculous amount. Like, it sounds like maybe you and I are eating craft dinner every day. That's not necessarily the case, because you are able to cut expenses massively. Like you mentioned, the property tax, the mortgage thing is a big one. I mean, when you showed me, well, not you didn't show me, in your book, when I read and I saw your daycare numbers, I mean, they were huge. And I mean, yeah, you've got 3 kids. So, I mean, that's going to be a lot. And I mean, to no longer have to pay any of that because the kids are at home with you is fantastic, right? So yeah, just something I think everybody has to sort of crunch these numbers for yourself and think, okay, if I actually wasn't working anymore at all, would this expense really be there? Like the second car loan that we have, that wouldn't be there. You could just sell your car like what you guys did, right? Or so I think that's, I don't know, to me, I think that's a huge eye opener, because it's easy to just dismiss your 30K a year spending or 40K a year spending when that actually is pretty reasonable. Our number is 40K a year. That's what I kind of try to stick to. And yeah, we've been under that, and it's not because we're trying to be super cheap and frugal all the time. Although maybe my wife would, argue that because I'm the more frugal one. But I mean, still, right? It's not, for that same lifestyle while you're working, you would be paying a lot more. Is all I'm trying to say. So yeah, so thank you very much for sharing that. And yeah, I encourage people to check out the book where you kind of break that down, because it is some analysis I think everyone has to do. You're also retired with 3 kids, and kids are often seen as this massive expense that makes early retirement nearly impossible, I'm sure some would say. Can you talk about how that's not necessarily so, especially with the Canada Child Benefit that parents are eligible for?
Yeah, that's a good point, and it's not something that was part of our plan at the beginning. It was when we the first thing we did when we decided we wanted to retire early was we looked at our expenses, and then we said we needed 30,000, and then we set out a plan to how we can generate 30,000 in cash flow, and that would be done through real estate and some index investing, and then then we started looking into the Canada Child Benefit, and we were really surprised by how generous it is for people who want to retire early. I give the example in the book that if you even if you just you don't have to aim for 30,000 in annual expenses, but even if you live on 50,000 in annual income, if just one spouse decided to quit their jobs and the other one worked part-time or full-time and made 50,000, if you reduce your annual reported income to 50,000 and you have 2 children, you'd be entitled to over $10,000 a year in CCB benefits if you had 2 children. So that's a huge bonus, that people may not take into consideration. That children, they aren't cheap, they aren't free to raise children, but they don't. The CCB really does offset a lot of the costs of having children in retirement. I mean, for us, we're earning under $30,000 a year. We're entitled to over $20,000 in CCB benefits. Like I mentioned in my book, we haven't been able to fully benefit from these payments yet, because we've been getting very lucky with our investments, with our real estate, with some other financial windfalls with our investments in the last couple of years. So we haven't been able to reduce our reported income to that level. So we haven't been able to benefit from the maximum amount. But it is something in the next few years, if we optimize our taxes, optimize how we the amount of income we report, we could be entitled for a very high CCB, which essentially offsets the entire cost of raising children. One thing I think of is, if you're used to spending $100,000 a year and you have a very expensive lifestyle, you and a spouse, you spend $100,000 a year, even with a very good CCB benefit of, let's say, $5,000 or $10,000 a year, it may not cover the cost of raising children, because you already have an expensive lifestyle. So it'll cover some of it, but it may not cover it all. But if you're able to reduce your spending as a couple to $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, well then a $10,000 boost, that's 20% increase. Well, that could cover all the expenses that a child will give you. So yeah, someone's contemplating early retirement, but they fear that maybe kids will put a wrench in the tires. It really won't. I find that with the benefits we have here in Canada with the CCB, children don't necessarily CCB won't I don't think CCB will make you richer in retirement. It won't give you necessarily extra income because you have kids, but it will essentially offset the cost of the children in your retirement plan.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah. And I was just doing some quick math here while you're talking. So let's say you're getting this $10,000 extra per year through the CCB. If you're using the 4% rule, which I know there's, arguments, and you can't just use it only use that. But if you were to do that, you multiply by 25. So 10,000 times 25 is $250,000 in terms of your sort of portfolio value to generate that same amount using the 4% rule. So if you're thinking, okay, I need $1 million to retire and I have kids and all that, well, if you were able to, let's say, get $10,000 a year through the CCB, that'd be equivalent to $250,000 of your portfolio. So now you're at $750,000 that you need instead of the $1 million, right? So that's just some, and again, there's this 4% rule, and there's arguments against just using it plainly like that. So I am oversimplifying a bit, but my main core point here is that, okay, let's say it's not 200,000 or 250,000, let's say it's 200,000. I mean, you can shave off hundreds of thousands of dollars, like six figures essentially, from how much you need to retire if you're factoring in the CCB. So it is something to basically not ignore. I guess don't assume it's always going to be there. I know you mentioned that you don't fully rely on it, because who knows if things will change politically in Canada and if it gets eliminated or changed or whatnot. But I mean, it is something definitely to not just kind of skim over if you have kids, because it should be a very significant part, I would say, of your early retirement planning if you have children. And it basically incentivizes you to be for one of you guys to be a stay-at-home parent, at least, right? Is what I found. Like if you're not making, like a six-figure salary, like some people, they, maybe you're making 50K a year, let's say, then, I mean, do the math, right? Like it may be the case where it's like, well, I can stay home with the kids. I no longer have to pay for daycare. And maybe you don't make as much as when you were working, but the amount might actually be so small that you're like, hey, I would rather, not have to go to work every day and basically be a stay-at-home parent. And I'm only taking our household's only taking a minor pay cut to do that because of CCB. So definitely just advising everyone to really have that on your radar, as it really is a game changer. It's not some petty like $20 a month, that you're getting. I mean, we're talking thousands of dollars over the course of a year.
And anybody who's on the path to early retirement or thinking of the idea of early retirement with children, I encourage them to go on the Government of Canada's website. You just Google CCB calculator, and the government has a really good tool where you input your details, what your projected annual income is, and the age of your children, and then it'll tell you exactly how much you're entitled to on an annual basis. And I guarantee you, if you've never used this tool and you go on there, you're going to be very surprised to see what you're entitled to at different income thresholds. So it's a really good tool to just, try different scenarios. Try a scenario if one spouse stopped working and the family income went down to 60,000. Try a certain scenario where you both stopped working, or try a scenario where you could, based on your current income, and if you do decide to have kids in the next few years. So it's definitely a good tool to look at to see what you are entitled to.
Yeah, it's a great tool just to run different scenarios, right? And it's interesting how it works, right? Where basically the less you make as a household, the more you get for free, essentially. So it works out pretty great. Now, most of the early retirees. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
The other thing I was just going to mention is all these benefits, the CCB, are all tax-free payments as well, which is, also a big point for early retirees. If you are, living on a very low reported income and paying very little taxes, and then you get a bonus. I almost call it like gravy, the CCB. It doesn't even increase your income. It doesn't even, you don't get taxed on it. So it really is a pretty generous benefit.
For sure. Now, most of the early retirees I've talked to and researched, they basically built up large investment portfolios with the intention of never working again. So not generating any sort of income, after they do the early retirement thing. But once they actually reach that financial independence number, they eventually ended up taking on some fun side projects that actually bring in an income. And so therefore, they didn't actually need as large of an investment portfolio as they initially thought. And if only they factored that in prior to retirement, they could have retired much earlier. I know this happened to me, Bryce and Christy, like basically an overwhelming majority, almost all of the early retirees I've studied. This is something that we did. Can you share your experience with this, as it seems to be extremely common with early retirees, and Canadians can really definitely retire much earlier if they actually include some anticipation of future side income like this in their early retirement plans?
Yeah, for sure. We, that's definitely the case for us as well. We've, we haven't really, had a side income or a side business that, has generated a significant amount of money, but we have made more money than we anticipated just by, finding even more optimizations in our real estate and actually, selling some of our real estate and making a lot more money. Our net worth was worth more than we even thought it was when we retired. So all these things could have, allowed us to retire a lot sooner. The other thing is writing this book was, I did it from a personal project standpoint, and it wasn't really about the money, but it will likely generate, some income. And, that's a bonus that, that I would not have anticipated or thought of. And I'm sure there's going to be a number of these opportunities in the future of other things that'll, come upon us where we will make additional money. But one thing that, I like that I like about not anticipating these things is that, if I would have retired early with the anticipation that we were going to make extra income, well, then these, personal, passion projects such as, writing a book maybe wouldn't have been as rewarding, because I would have been doing it with the assumption that, I need to write this and I need to generate a certain amount of income. And then it would have felt more like, an obligation rather than it being like, I'm doing this purely for a personal standpoint. And, if it generates income, it's just a bonus. So yeah, I like the idea that we didn't anticipate any additional income. And when if we do generate additional incomes with, side gigs or, projects or, business ventures, then it really is just a bonus. And it's not something that, we're obligated to do.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yeah, I guess if you feel like you have to do it because that's what you put in your projections, it can kind of suck the fun out of the project a little bit potentially, right? Because you're like, oh, I have to monetize this because that we're depending on this money versus just not having to do it. So yeah, that's a really interesting perspective for sure. Thank you for sharing that. So through my research and own experience, I found that getting that sense of fulfillment can actually be a challenge for retirees when they no longer have to work. And I know in your book, you said that being a dad gives you that sense of fulfillment, but is there anything else outside of parenting that you find really helps in this regard? And I find this answer might particularly be helpful for those retirees who either don't have kids or those who have kids, but the kids are out on their own now. And so they no longer require that large time investment anymore.
Yeah, for sure. I think, for us, it's, like you said, it's, being a parent, because that occupies like the majority of our time. But for me, I found fulfillment in just in taking the time and writing and, doing something like writing a book. That was a very fulfilling project. It was to see it through to the end and to actually, publish it was very fulfilling. And, I anticipate that, it's something I like doing. So it's something I may keep doing. I may keep writing more regularly and may write more regularly on our blog and may work on another book. Every day I come up with a new book idea that, I think of, this would make a good book. So then I write it down, but now I have 50 ideas for a book. So I don't know which one I'll work on, but it is important to find those things that will fulfill you, because I can see that as being, if you're someone who is, very proud of their career or proud of their job and that, once you walk away from that, you do need something. You do need something that, gives you fulfillment and gives you a purpose. So yeah, it's important to find stuff like that. And for us, like you said, it is being a parent, but there will come a time when our children will need us a lot less, and they will need our attention a lot less as they grow older. So my wife and I always brainstorm on, small business ideas for the future. Maybe when the kids are older, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to do. Maybe we'll take on this business idea, but we always brainstorm ideas of stuff that what kind of business can we run in the future where it's very hands off and something that we're excited about, but something that we could walk away and go on a 3-month trip if we want to. So those are things that we think about a lot, because there will come a time where we will need additional fulfillment if when the kids get older. Another thing is traveling. Traveling is a big part of our lifestyle, and we do a lot of camping. We did over 30 nights of camping last summer. This upcoming summer, we hope to take on a trip to the West Coast camping as well. That's a very fulfilling part of our lifestyle, and that could be a lot of people that retire without kids. That is how they get their fulfillment. They just travel the world. So yeah, I anticipate that, our traveling will just keep getting more and more as our kids get older, because it'll get easier to travel with older kids and to take on more, um, bigger adventures and the sort. So, yeah.
Did you guys encounter a retirement honeymoon type phase that's pretty common, where you handed in your resignations, you're retired now, so you have a lot of fun, just kind of easygoing, and then after a while you're kind of looking for that sort of fulfillment, that next project? Is that when your book started, or how did you guys experience that at all? It's a very common thing. I know I definitely went through it as well.
No, not really, because I think right from the beginning of retirement, we've really kept extremely busy just with renovating the house we had purchased, and handling our real estate investments, and just we did the first summer we retired, we went to the East Coast and we did a 30-day camping trip, just exploring all the provinces on the East Coast of Canada, and then we had a child in retirement, which that really didn't allow us to take a breath, because we were dealing with a newborn and sleepless nights and the busyness. So we really, I guess we might not even have gone past the honeymoon stage yet. I guess we've just been incredibly busy, and then the book came about in the last year, when things started slowing down a little bit. But I can't say that we experienced like a drop off in a honeymoon stage, I guess.
Yeah, it's like if you have kids, it's a different thing, right? Because it's like, well, we had another kid and we already had two, and so that kept us pretty busy. So it's hard to go for that full blown relaxation when when you have all these things to do, especially with the children. So I hear you. So what are your goals and plans now? Especially now that the book is written.
Well, like I said, assuming things open up a little, with the COVID regulations, and hopefully we get to experience a somewhat normal spring, summer coming up, and we hope to do, our family hopes to do a lot more traveling this coming year, since we haven't been able to do traveling for the last year or so. We just purchased a motorhome, my wife and I. So we that was kind of something we contemplated for a long time. We've always been, very strong like camping enthusiasts, and done a lot of camping, mostly tent camping. But we decided to dive in and buy a motorhome now, and we're going to try that this coming spring, summer. And we're hoping, like I said, to do a big trip in the west coast of Canada, probably spend about 60 days over there. And the motorhome is going to be great with the 3 kids. We'll be able to, sit them at the table and do more activities while we drive and do the long days of driving. And then, I hope to, in going forward, I hope to, write a lot more, keep our blog a lot more active. For me, it's been, when we can find the free time, and for us in September, when we had 2 of our kids start, or we had 1 child already in school, but then our second child went to school full time. So it really opened up a lot more free time for us. We still had 1 more child here at home with us. But in the future, when all 3 of them are going to be, in school, we're going to have way more free time, and we're going to, then we're going to really start working on more, personal projects, and, potentially, write more books in the future, more blog related activity. So just more traveling, more writing, keep growing the family.
Awesome. Well, that sounds great. So we already covered this, but maybe tell us again, just remind us best place to get your book, where we can get it. And thank you so much for coming on. This has been awesome.
Well, like I said, the book, best place to find it is on Amazon. Either search directly on Amazon or get the link from our website at mindfulfamily.ca. And on our blog, our blog is Mindful Family, because it's not really a strictly financial blog, because we blog about some of the parenting ideas we have, our obstacles, and some of the successes we've had parenting, and then we talk a lot about the things we do for our health, and then we also talk a lot about finance related topics. So lots of good content there, and then you can find the link on that website as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on, and we'll talk next time. Take care.
Okay. Thanks. All
right. Take care. Bye. All right. Thanks so much for joining me this month. A big thanks to Rajan for coming on the show. Also, don't forget to check out that high interest savings account and the new high interest TFSA and RRSP, where you can get that really high interest rate of 2.3%. And that's over at buildwealthcanada.ca/EQ. That's buildwealthcanada.ca/ the letter E and the letter Q. And after you open the account, just send me any confirmation email you get from them to bonus@buildwealthcanada.ca, and I'll send you my guide on the top ETFs in Canada, which includes everything that I currently invest in and why. Also, don't forget about some of the other free resources we have available. So if you have any financial planning related questions, you can reach out to John over at buildwealthcanada.ca/John for a free 30-minute consultation. If you have any mortgage related questions or real estate questions, you can reach out to Sean Cooper over at buildwealthcanada.ca/Sean. That's SEAN. And for any investing type questions, you can check out the course, which is over at buildwealthcanada.ca/invest. Again, thanks so much for joining me. Please leave a review on iTunes if you enjoyed the show. Thanks again for coming, and see you next month.
Thanks for listening to the Build Wealth Canada podcast at www.buildwealthcanada.ca.